thinking on this squelching hot day. So I did this in the essay form on the website, and I got a lot of great view counts and stuff like that. So I thought, it's a different crowd, and, you think about it a little bit longer. I did do it to an outline before. I'm going to see if I can't wing this one. Thinking. Well, you might have a question. You might be like, is he literally talking about thinking, or is he talking about something else? I am literally talking about the difference within your mind of actually thinking and doing memory recall or doing something that your body automatically does. Some autonomic system. The people that do well in the later years of their lives are people who never stopped actually thinking. But here's what's interesting about the whole thing. 150 years ago, thinking was not something that I would have to do a lesson on. But today, I have to do this lesson because we have misconstrued and misunderstood what thinking is. What am I talking about? How many people have been in a room where everyone watched Jeopardy? And you're like, oh my God, those people are so smart. They know everything, all these weird questions. A contestant who wins every single Jeopardy episode at no point really has to think. All they're doing is a glorified memorize and repeat mechanism. They're going in there to the database and grabbing a little bit of memory and then repeating it, using the question on the screen as a mechanism to isolate down what memory they then bring back. You could take a contestant who has won every single episode they've ever been on, never missed a question, put them in Mensa, give them a test on thinking, and they would fail miserably. And the reason is they don't actually think. They just memorize and repeat. And you can't memorize and repeat intelligence. Now, you need memorizing and repeating to facilitate intelligence, because if you want to connect a bunch of dots and then start thinking and start, developing some sort of further theory in the life, in anything, right, you're going to need a lot of reference material, right? But thinking keeps people strong way into their 90s. And there's a bunch of people who are vegetables like in their 70s, right? Had a really interesting thing happen when I was a kid. My late teens, I came here to California. So I was going to this church, and they had a little program where you go visit old people in old folks' homes. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and she was interested in doing it, and I had done it before in the Midwest. So I went out there, and immediately they kind of introduce you to the person you're going to visit, the sponsored person. It was a 93-year-old woman, but being the kind of guy I am, I meet everybody. So I go into her room, and there's an 86-year-old woman and a 74-year-old woman also in the same room. This has a lot of actual amazing points about it, but the 93-year-old woman got up every morning, dressed herself, looked tip-top condition. She may have looked, I know her silver hair kind of gave away the ultimate age that she had, but in terms of if you just took her hair and could make it a nice, believable color, this woman would have been in her mid-50s. That's how healthy she was. 86-year-old had complications and was now wheelchair-bound, but pretty sentient. The 74-year-old was comatose, completely vegged out with Alzheimer's. Now you think about the medical regimens that these individuals were actually sold. I'm diverting out of the thinking thing for 1 second, but the woman that never did anything, never took any vaccinations, castor oil woman, 93, completely healthy. 86-year-old, a little bit of indoctrination, got some margarine in her and some other stuff. She's wheelchair bound. 74-year-old, completely crazy. She didn't say anything. They would dress her up in a beautiful woman. She's dressed in this dress. She always looked really nice. I kind of talked to her. She couldn't talk back. Full-blown Alzheimer's. Brain full of aluminum. All the vaccinations, all the flu shots in her, right? This is 30 years ago, but just interesting. So why is it that if you think, and we're going to get to exactly what thinking is, do you actually not lose your consciousness as you get older? The answer is this. When you think, you actually put an amount of electricity through the neurons in your mind. Okay? Neurons have really mystified the medicine institutions of the world, the medical institutions of the world, the scientific institutions. And for a very long time, they said, you do not create new brain cells past maybe the age of 10. And I'm not sure why they ever came up with the age of 10, but they're wrong in all accounts. I've said it several times on the show, you create brain cells to the day you die. But there is a mechanism by which a brain cell is convinced to duplicate. It's not a mitosis of like a normal cell in your body that just has to go every 30 to 40 days because it itself is going to die, right? Mitosis happens fairly regularly and on schedule. It's how your body keeps going. Within 7 years or so, your body has completely replaced itself internally and externally. But your neurons, a little bit different. Your neuron says, well, if I'm not very busy, no need to go into this procreation state. If I get really busy, then obviously there's too much thinking that needs to occur, and I need to make cousins, siblings, offspring, that will take on part of the charge. So if you vision this sticky, weird cell, and this is the other thing that blew the scientific community's mind for a long time, was this, a normal cell looks like a little suitcase with a little tiny, nucleus in the middle, and it subdivides and just divides in half. A neuron's a sticky, weird, wiry cell with these crazy long paths to connect them together. And they were like, man, what the hell is this stuff? And how does it multiply? There's no suitcase dividing going on in this whole chamber. Well, you must be born with all the brain cells that you need, and It doesn't work like that. Yes, you get a brain when you're born, of course. A neuron, and the more you understand this, is the more you'll understand why everyone's healthy who thinks and everybody who's not healthy who doesn't think. I had one grandmother who was a teacher for 36 years. She lived to be 83 and eventually got dementia and I think some other neurotoxins and ended up kind of going crazy. My other grandma got dementia really, really early in their probably mid-70s, and it just slowly creeped up on her until she's about 79, I think, and she was just crazy. And then I'm not sure why she passed away exactly. I think maybe her brain and her organs didn't communicate well, but this is where you can scientifically understand how to stay out of the problem. When a neuron gets overcharged with thoughts, and remember a thought just comes through like a wire and it goes bing, and it bounces off the interior electrical structure of your brain, right? So just imagine this sticky cell and just imagine like a little LED in the center. And every time you think, here comes a path, boom, and everything that lights like a disco light, boom, 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 all the way through, right? Okay. If that disco light, that little LED goes on a lot for a particular cell because you're constantly pounding your mind, you're in college, you're going to your midterms, or you're learning something new, that will be the reason why the cell multiplies, because it goes, look, man, I don't want to take on this much work, right? I need to procreate. And so what it does is it takes part of its nucleus and ejects it into the brain cavity. Then all of the surrounding cells, neural cells, start to send the materials to it to encase it. And that process is how the new cell gets distributed beautifully inside your brain, usually between some physical midpoint between other neurons that are in this area of the mind. So you always worry, the scientists are always trying to figure out, hey, look, when you think about colors, it's this part of your brain. If you think about drag race cars, it's over here. Wherever that is, whatever your thought is that keeps happening and happening, that's the exact area that gets stimulated to procreate new brain cells. And so they send out biological material to encase it, to protect it. And in doing so, just the path to send the biological matter to that nucleus creates the neural wire that connects it to all its neighboring cells, and they all work together. And it's that reason, that methodology of procreation, that it, visually didn't make any sense to the scientists who had seen the suitcase dividing thing. And so that may be one of the reasons why they said that the brain doesn't make any brain cells. Today, I believe they say that that's the reason, because they're toxifying us so badly, but by the time we hit 40, all the toxification has screwed up our eyesight, It screwed up our bodies in general. And so they're trying to say this is a natural way that you deteriorate over time. Now, when you come from the Midwest, something beautiful gets added to your bag of tricks. You see old people in a way that you don't see them in a big city typically, which is that they'll say, that's old man Taylor. And old man Taylor, his son and his son and his son, you know the whole stretch. And they say, well, who's that guy? What did he do? Oh, well, he made that farm out there, the big farm out there with the huge silos that he built. Oh, he buried all the Cadillacs sideways. That's the dude right there, right? And his whole life story. And then you'll be sitting there in a restaurant or a convenience store or gas station, and here comes old man Taylor. 90-something years old. You can go up and have a conversation with him, and you talk to him. You start distilling out his intelligence. And you start to realize that brother kept thinking his whole life. And he's alive. He is vibrant. I've told this once before. I was in this specialized math class because I had a metal teacher, Mr. Reading, who actually invented one of the first guitar pickups ever before Les Paul, supposedly. And he's a genius, this guy. He was taught by the military in the 40s how to make a dirty bomb. I mean, this was like nuts. And he taught us some special tricks on how to do that. Here I am, this like junior nuclear physicist, and he tells me he can make a dirty bomb. And I said, oh, really? I said, everything else is based off plutonium. What is your trick? And he just looked at me like, ease back, child. He just looked at me and he goes, oh, there's a lot of ways to make stuff that's unstable. And I'm like, okay, tell me. And he freaking told me how to do it. It's not exactly like you can do it with a screwdriver and an orange, but it's not that hard. Anyhow, that guy was teaching us this advanced mathematics stuff. And this old man comes. It's a shop class, right? So we're sitting in a metal shop. Wood shop's on the other side of the building. I think the building's been torn down. This old man shows up, and he backs his truck. Ancient truck, right? Backs it in. He starts picking up all this heavy metal shit, right? Heavy metal. Starts picking up all this heavy stuff and put it in the back of his truck. One of the guys went over to help him, big boxer dude, big farm boy, and he's like, no, I got it. And I was like, you sure? Okay, all right. So then he leaves. Actually, no, you know what? I think he actually did pick one of them off the ground, and he damn near had a hernia doing it, the kid. Anyway, the guy packs up his truck and leaves. No big deal. And then we said, hey, dude, who was that guy? And he's like, oh, that's my dad. And so my teacher's probably late 50s, early 60s. And we're like, that's your father? And he's like, yeah, he's like 95 years old. So he says he's 95, and we're all looking at each other like, you're kidding me. That guy did not look remotely, I mean, he looked old, I guess, visually, but man, when he was moving, he's a big dude, too. He was bigger than his son by at least 4 or 5 inches, and just proportionate. But he didn't stop thinking. He didn't stop using it, so he didn't lose it. And that's what I have to get over to you guys, okay? So let me give you an example of thinking and not thinking. If I say, what's the continent in which contains the Nile? You're going into a memorize and repeat. You're just going to access that. Boom, Africa. Now, if I say, I'm going to give you a number set right now, and you need to come up with the next 3 numbers. And here's the first numbers: 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8. What are the next 3 numbers? Your brain is going to have to think. What is he doing there? I don't know. It's weird. It's not prime numbers. It's not even in odds. Oh, well, look, he skips one about every third one. He skips one, and then he goes to the next one, and then it repeats. Well, what do you think the repeat cycle is? Is it after the skip, or does he continue? The first one started with 2, and then he skipped 3, and then he went to 4, and then he went, that's thinking. Thinking, I like to say always, should hurt a little bit. When you work out, if you've never worked out, or you haven't worked out in like 6 or 7 months, and you pick up some weights, it hurts, right? But I guarantee you within the first week, or maybe even on the same day that you first get back into it, you're going to feel damn good. The other thing that you need to do is detoxify your body And this is going to sound a little esoteric, and for those of you who don't get into anything conspiracy, you just bumped into this out of thin air, you're going to be a little bit taken off guard. So let me just say that this is MK Ultra Radio, and we are a conspiracy truth site. We chase the real conspiracies in the world and expose them so that you will live in reality. It's toxification of the mind. Let's go at it real quick so we can clean you up to get you ready to think. And the regimen I'm about to tell you is going to take anywhere from immediate to a year and a half, 2 years to completely take effect in your mind, depending on how much you ingest the stuff I'm about to tell you. We always, talk about keeping you healthy, because that's our number one goal. I mean, seriously, you have to understand my heart reaches out to everyone who listens, and I want you to be healthy, and you got neighbors like this that will drive you freaking crazy, right? They're trying to be up your butt. I let you do it yourself, obviously. I'm just a YouTube channel, but let me tell you, this is not BS. And if you get done with what I'm about to tell you, and you were totally into it like I was, check in a year and a half, and your whole mind literally will be different. The way that you ingest reality will be totally different. Maybe not completely, totally, but like a huge percentile of 100%. Will be different, and you'll have so much more control. And the frontiers of where you could take the process of thinking in your life and extend it to something productive that's you is going to increase quite a bit. So here's the regimen. No artificial sweeteners of any kind. I mean of any kind. Now, aspartame is the number one sweetener that gets inside your mind, and it metabolizes into formaldehyde and methanol. Methanol is the alcohol you rub your hands with, or you swab on an injury. It's not the kind you drink to get high. Both will toxify your mind. Anything that gets into your blood-brain barrier, through your blood-brain barrier, gets into your mind, and it sits in there pretty much until some happy accident happens where it falls out of your brain, which doesn't usually happen. And for those of you who are not aware of the blood-brain barrier, most of you have seen the cross-section of a skull, right? And you have essentially the big brain cavity that has the big, brain-looking thing. And then you have your nasal canal and your throat and all that stuff, right? Well, the exact spot where your brain lays inside your skull, all right, there's this special blood-brain barrier that's designed to keep toxins out of the mind. And it's something that the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical companies have worked extremely hard to penetrate with ease in order to toxify a human being. Toxify them for weaponized reasons and toxify them for long-term illnesses, of which the same banks own the pharmaceutical companies that own the hospitals. They get you sick, they make a ton of cash off you. That's basically the simple economic eco-cycle of the whole thing. So no aspartame, no sucralose. Anything that's sugar-free or zero-calorie, it must taste like zero-calorie. Okay, there can't be this giant sweetness. Now, stevia is a South American substitute. Now, that is actually fairly harmless unless you have low blood pressure problems, and they say that it actually can lower your blood pressure. So just keep that in mind. Stevia isn't quite vetted yet. In fact, Coca-Cola's got a green bottle now that you can get in some stores that's stevia-based. It's interesting. It's like a half mix. But sugar is what you can metabolize. Understand that sugar makes your organs swell up. It's an inflammatory. And so the more that you inflame every single day, the less your body's going to function properly. Okay? But that's not going to really, I guess that would affect your mind as well. So when you get out of aspartame, it's a fairly instantaneous change in your system. The other one is fluoride. Fluoride is a metal dust. It's a byproduct of making aluminum. They'll tell you it's a byproduct of natural, like it's in tea. The amount that occurs in nature is a millionth of what it actually is when they put it in your toothpaste, right? Now, I talked about some of these things being instantaneous and some of them taking a little while. Getting rid of aspartame out of your life is going to be an instantaneous improvement in your body. Okay, now you probably have residual formaldehyde and methanol in your system if you pound this stuff, and I used to pound Diet Dr. Pepper like crazy, so please don't think I'm coming from any high and mighty ground, right? But getting rid of fluoride out of your life, and I suggest you look up a toothpaste brand named Jason's, and I believe it's made in Europe, so if you're in Europe, Jason's should definitely be in your in your store. If nothing else, go to Amazon to get it. It's got a little umlaut thing over the A, I believe, or I think it's over the A. Maybe it's over the O. But Jason's has got tons of flavors. There's also Tom's. Tom's, I haven't tried in a long time. I always think the taste is kind of crappy. But there's all kinds of non-fluoridated toothpaste, and I mean all kinds. That change is going to take maybe a year to a year and a half, because what's occurred is this dust goes into the pineal gland, which is your third eye. It's your link to the universe. It's what it determines how much you dream at night. It determines how many concepts you can hold in your mind and correlate all at once. Okay, and that's crucial to thinking. I gave you that number thing. You had to create slots in your mind to see what I said, so that you could come up with the next numbers, right? If you injure your sockets, right, and they used to say back in the day in the 70s, our phone numbers were 7 digits long because the mind has no problem memorizing 7 digits. And now with cell phones and pagers, we blew it up, and now we have to memorize the area code, but now we have cell phones, so you never have to remember the number anyway, right? The fluoride is actually crystallizing in your pineal gland. It's stacking up like particles in your pineal gland. And in the end, it displaces your flesh. Your body's actually pretty complicit, and it also gives you osteoporosis, and it also gives you tooth decay. Believe it or not, fluoridated toothpaste is the number one reason why dentists get visitors, okay, because it actually rots your teeth. And you'll have a bunch of people who've done no research in their life that'll argue with you on this. Just don't get in the argument. Just don't brush with it. But that one will take about a year to year and a half. And that was one of the most significant transformations of my own mind. And believe me, I think you get the fact that I think, and I pay attention to quantified amounts of thinking. How much can I get thought of in this year? How much did I expand my consciousness in a year, right? I'm monitoring those things. And after I got off of fluoride, I kind of got off it, didn't think about it. And then about a year and a half later, I realized I was driving in traffic, and I thought, my God, I feel like I'm high. I feel like I'm thinking like twice as fast as everyone else. It was just, I had to get used to being able to take in more information at one point, being able to process it, because I was able to do it. But it would be almost as if I waved a magic wand on one of you and your IQ goes up 200 points. That's going to be disturbing, even though it's a great thing. And I think that's what you'll find if you get off fluoride. But as I was saying is that any like particle likes to adhere to itself. It has a similar atomic composition, if not identical, and therefore their forces actually work together, and this is where you get crystal growth, right? And crystals are very cool, by the way. But the crystals grow inside your body, right? And they tend to go together. So they grow inside the enamel of your teeth, displacing the enamel, causing it to crack, causing you to get cavities. It goes into the porous nature of your bones and displaces bone. Now, any time something starts gathering in your body, especially cancer, your body just gets out of the way. It's like, hey, you must need to be here. It doesn't think on its own and say you're an invader. And for whatever reason, the immune system can't catch just a mineral and say, dude, you need to get the hell out of here, right? So fluoride goes through the blood-brain barrier, gets up into your pineal gland. Again, fluoride was first used by the Nazis against the Jews to calm them down inside concentration camps so they wouldn't rebel. On the side of your toothpaste, it says if you swallow as much as a pea-size size of toothpaste, you need to go to the Poison Control Center and barf it all up and that kind of stuff. However, if you drink an 8-ounce glass or probably 12-ounce glass of fluoridated water out of your city water tap, it's the same exact amount of fluoride in both substances. The other thing is that, especially drinking fluoride out of your water, and this is where you need to get a water filter and get a water filter that filters fluoride, because you have to understand Brita doesn't filter out fluoride. It's a very tough substance to get out there. If there is a Brita filter that filters fluoride, then it's brand new, and I have no idea about it. But you can look up fluoride water filters. There's a lot of desktop, or tabletop versions you can put in your kitchen. That's what I have in mine. It's a reverse osmosis thing. You want to stop ingesting this stuff. And it's like unlocking the key to your mind, okay? But yeah, your pineal gland has to repair. So, you stop ingesting this stuff, the crystallized structure breaks down due to the blood circulation around it, and then it just gets eroded over time and leaves your mind. If you're like me, you brushed with fluoride for the majority of your life until you hear this piece of news. I brushed till 35. I'm 46 now. So I've been out for 11 years. And I can tell you right now that I felt like I was reborn as a human being. The consciousness that I was able to capture as a result of getting off fluoride was huge. Okay. The other one is microwave ovens. And I know what you're thinking. Someone's going to tell you that the microwave ovens create radioactive food. It's not true. Here's what it does that you need to be careful about. Okay, and it relates directly to aspartame. Microwave ovens shatter food compounds. What's a food compound? A food compound is two food elements attached together that are never supposed to be detached from each other during the digestive process in your body. Very simple example is the skin of an apple. The skin of an apple has pectin, which is really good for you. It's very fibrous, just knocks on everything inside your digestive system and frees you up. But it also has methyl ester, the stuff that's unbound inside of aspartame that you should never consume, which turns into methyl ester / rubbing alcohol inside your brain. It's bound to pectin. Now, if you just eat an apple, it's no big deal. Fresh apple, boom. You eat it, goes through your system. The methyl ester is bound to the pectin all the way through your bowels. You're good. If you microwave that to make ingredients for some apple pie or something, or you try to warm up the apple pie, or if there's, again, usually we deskin all the apple stuff, but this is just kind of a crude example. But the methyl ester and the pectin will get separated by the microwave that's oscillating at 1 billion cycles per second. And it takes a water molecule and turns it from North Pole to South Pole every iteration of the frequency, which is 1 billion times per second. That agitation disrupts the nuclear bonds that hold those two together, and now you're ingesting a toxin in your system. Russia had banned, and I think it's still banned to this day, microwave ovens because they have socialized medicine. They did the math on these machines and said, we don't want our citizens to get sick, for one, and we don't want to pay for it as a communistic, socialistic provision, right? I'm going to give you an esoteric one. My hair's long. I get snide comments every once in a while online about it. I'm trying to be somebody else. I'm not trying to be a rocker. I'm my own rock star. No, I mean, my buddies are rock stars, and, you don't hang out with them and go, I'm growing my hair out to be just like you. It never happens, right? Here's why my hair is long. Because I didn't grow up my whole life with my hair long at all. In fact, I had really short, spiky white hair back in the day. I started my video game company and got extremely busy. And I was so extremely busy for the first 2 years that I just wasn't getting to the barbershop. And so I kept growing and growing and growing. It was obviously a super awkward stage. And I had long hair one time down in my chin in the early 90s, and it looked horrible. Every time I went and got my hair cut, they cut like a woman. And so I just kept growing it out just because I was too busy. And then I started meeting all my 80s rocker buddies who, basically comprise most of the 80s rock bands out there. And all of a sudden I was in the pocket. So now I'm hanging out with these guys at their concerts, try to help them out with their tours, their corporate bylaws and, code of conduct and all that kind of stuff. So it just so happened that the way I ended up looking matched the group I was hanging out with. And that's why I have long hair. Now, why mention that in the middle of a thinking episode? I'm not trying to toot any horns or whatever. There's an article that went around the web. I guess it's 4 or 5 years old, but I didn't see it till about a year ago. And they talked about the Native Americans who had long hair were actually excellent trackers of the enemy. And they had seemed to have some sort of spiritual connection with the universe. And I was like, that's very interesting, because the correlation between my own accidental hair growth and reality coincided that I felt like I detoxed my body and I grew my hair out all at the same exact time, right? And I don't know if there's any science to this, but you'll hear a lot of folks talk about the fact that the DNA strand within the human body, if it is truly the way they say it is, the double helix, it's exactly like every electrical pattern in the universe. When the sun is screaming through space and all of us planetary bodies are going through the sun, it's actually creating, in 3 dimensions, if you created a trail and everything, a full-blown double helix with the center core being the sun. So it looks like there's this sort of Fibonacci DNA, helix pattern that we're all made out of. And if you look down the barrel of any rose bush stem, you'll see the Fibonacci pattern. It's looping like this, and all the thorns seem to come out in the same exact points all the way up. But it's just this repeating pattern of thorns that goes all the way up the stem of a rose bush, right? My whole yard's full of rose bushes. So they're saying that there's science now that suggests that if you have longer hair, that you're more attuned and in sync with empathy and sympathy, because you're simply taking in more of the electrical vibe of what's going on. You're more at one with plants, and you can feel their people's feelings. And I thought it was interesting that in this culture today, men are supposed to have short hair and women are supposed to have long hair. That's the average, mean of existence in pretty much all cultures on this planet. If a woman cuts her hair short, everyone kind of goes, I don't know. And if you get really overweight or something, they might think you're, different. And okay, there may be truth to growing hair out. Men who were very spiritual warriors way back in the day all had long hair. You talk about your Irish guys that used to, the Celtics, right? They used to fight with no clothes on. Talk about some balls on those guys, right? Imagine a bunch of soldiers running over the crest of a mountain carrying shields, totally naked, coming to kill you. You're thinking, man, I can just hit you in the dick, and it's like, you won't be able to. That's what I'm telling you. That's why I'm naked, is that I am so good at the sword, so good at the shield, and the spear or whatever, you won't be able to even touch my junk. Like, that's terrifyingly amazing, right? So I just want to say that because there might be some truth to growing out your hair and becoming a little bit more spiritually connected with the information. I don't know. I'm not ready to cut my hair off just yet. At some point, it'll recede enough or thin out enough. Luckily, it's not thinning at all, but there'll be a point where I cut it all off and that'll just be it, Look at that article, Native American long hair trackers or something like that. And you'll see the articles all over Facebook for a little while before I jumped out of Facebook. So we want to get you in a conscious regimen of thinking. We want you to know when you're thinking and know when you're not thinking, so that you can give yourself time. And just think about it. You won't go every single minute of every day pushing yourself to think, and make it all hard on your brain. But you want to know when the switch is on and when it's off. So if you haven't deduced this already, here's the basics, okay? If you're memorizing and repeating, if you're in a Jeopardy game in life, you're simply going in for recall and you're not thinking. That's why we have a huge problem with general practitioners and doctors that just prescribe medicine, because they're not thinking much. They're looking up tables in their minds from the symptoms that you exhibit. Their brilliance is only proportionate to the lookup table in their brain that they got from medical school. When you go into medical school, and I've got family members, several doctors, I've got liver specialists, plastic surgeons, heads of chemistry, all these guys that went through this stuff, plus good friends that have done it. I asked them about their regiment in school, and they said, really it was memorizing every piece and part of the anatomy of a human body, and then the second layer up, which was to figure out what everything does and how it works together, and then the third layer up, which is all the typical ailments that are very common in the human body, and if they specialize within that particular area, the fourth layer, which is exactly what happens to that particular organ, right? Okay. It's still all memorizing and repeating. And the problem with it is that you get into dogma theories. And when you go to medical school, for instance, there's something called the dogma theory, which is related to the function of a human cell. And I've talked about this a couple times on the show, but I just want to give you an example of where we have to monitor whether or not we're thinking for ourselves or whether or not we're just memorizing and repeating and potentially carrying forward bad information. In medical school, and this is coming to you straight from Bruce Lipton. If you haven't heard of Bruce Lipton, you can go to brucelipton.com. One of my, and this is a freebie for me to you. I'll try to find it and stick it up here on the episode, at least on Facebook. Bruce Lipton wrote 2 books, and one of them is called, one of them is like a short addendum of the bigger book, but the bigger book is called Wisdom of Your Cells. Go look up on YouTube, straight up above. Pull up another browser and get it queued up, and just look up Wisdom of Your Cells. Look for Bruce Lipton. It should be, I think, a picture of, I shouldn't even say, maybe a butterfly or something like that. But there's one that did after that used the butterfly too, so to be careful. Anyway, he reads the book to you, and I think it's free now on YouTube. And I bought the book for $80 on an audio form because I was driving around a lot at the time. This book is utterly brilliant. But let me give you a crash course in who Bruce is and then show you where thinking on his behalf changed the whole game. Bruce got into epigenetics, and Bruce is the reason why I always harp on Darwin, because Bruce was able to track back a French guy named de Lamarck in the late 1770s, working under Napoleon, who actually was the head science czar for France. And he was a peasant before, and he was not an aristocrat, but he was the smartest guy in this particular area. And he really deduced epigenetics. And epigenetics is not just survival of the fittest, but the way that we construct thoughts, controls how we evolve, and how the environment interacts with us electrically, and every way, shape, or form. You're warm, you're cold. It's windy, it's not windy. It's like it's really warm today. Your body will evolve based on those environmental conditions, okay? So what Bruce figured out, in addition to this whole thing, was how the human cell worked. And he was constantly taught something that he described as the dogma theory in medical school, which is that the nucleus of a cell is the brain of the cell, because it contains the chromosomes, which is your DNA, and that's it. He found out it's completely the opposite. Here's what he discovered. One, he discovered that the chromosome is 50% protein patterns and 50% DNA. When you're told in Hollywood and general medical conversations, and you read these analysis reports on Amgen and these sort of biotech companies, it's all about DNA sequencing and DNA and DNA and DNA. Well, the first thing that he realized was that, DNA is nothing more than the individual Lego blocks in the, Millennium Falcon Lego box that you get, right? And there's a ton of the same pieces over and over and over again. But it's nothing without a schematic of how to build a Millennium Falcon. And so the schematics are the other 50% of the chromosome that's called protein patterns. And so protein patterns are the schematics that make us different than a housefly. When they total up the individual DNA blocks, right, this is where we become very close to a housefly, an earthworm, a chimpanzee. But when you study the schematics that actually make us what we are, that's where we're millions of times more complex than those houseflies and earthworms. So he said, look, the genius of the chromosome is actually in the protein layer. That's the first thing he figured out. And he said that, every time they did the genome project, they would boil off 50% of the protein patterns out of a chromosome to then study the sequence of the DNA. And he goes, before they started, they had figured out that this whole project was going to be a big waste of time, because what they really need to control is the protein if they want to change the way the human body works. And, mad cow was a protein virus, horribly deadly. If you ever hear about a protein virus that's mutating in your neighborhood and your country, get your ears perked up, because that's the one that can wipe out the human race. Okay, regular viruses we can nail. Okay. But he was also told us that this nucleus was the brain of the cell, because look at our body, we have this brain inside of a cavity, and so obviously it's our brain, so why not make a cell, similar to the way we view ourselves? All right. He found out very quickly that the membrane of a cell was actually the genius of the cell. He did something called enucleate the cell, which is you take a really teeny tiny microscopic suction mechanism, and you push it inside the cell, and you literally suck the internal nucleus out of the middle of the cell, and then you leave it in a petri dish. And he realized that the cell kept living its full life, 30 to 40 days. He said it just couldn't repair itself, and it couldn't multiply, because that's what the center does. It's just a mechanism to serve the outer side. So I mentioned this particular thing in the thinking episode. Well, here's the deal. This dude was indoctrinated with the memorize and repeat regimen of how the human body worked. And he said, that's cool. I like working in laboratories, so I'm going to go into the laboratory and I'm going to prove what I've just been taught out of a book to make sure that it's true. And he found out it wasn't true. And he went right back into his medical school, which I believe this kid was damn near done with medical school in his mid-20s. He was a bit of a prodigy child, if not a complete bona fide prodigy child. And he said, guys, I've got it. And he tries to get his, colleagues to listen to him. And they said, you know what? You're bucking the system. It's more important that the system survives than you figure out that we're telling lies. And they kicked him out. He went and taught and conducted medical school and medical procedures in Guam because they allowed him to be honest. And how pathetic is that for the American college system? And again, you're going to find out that, Professors that have never had jobs in their real life, right? They never real jobs. They just went in, got education, went right back into school to hide out of the midst of the rest of the world to teach. It used to be that someone would get educated, go out into the real world, practice, get wisdom as opposed to just intelligence, right? Intelligence is facts on paper. Wisdom is intelligence actually used to find out what works and what doesn't work, right? And then they would come back into an educational institution as a bona fide expert and teach, right? I lecture at colleges from time to time. Like I'll go 8 months and I don't talk to any colleges. Then it's like 4 or 5 in a row, boom, 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 boom. And it's because I'm coming in with wisdom about what I'm talking about. I've seen it actually work, But that's the benefit of thinking. And that's what your doctor most likely doesn't do. Now, the doctors that are pioneering research, they're pioneering surgery. They're making new instruments, right? If you ever go watch the show on HBO called Nick, the Nick, K-N-I-C-K, it's the medical industry in the 1900s, and there's this guy named Dr. Thatcher, and it's played by Clive Owen. He is one of these doctors that they're all of them are competing in New York to invent, methods to pioneer research for hernias and C-sections and a bunch of other stuff. And they're not only thinking constantly, but they're inventing tools to make the procedures safer for the individuals. It's really kind of cool. That needs to be us. We need to think constantly. So I want to start talking quickly about a regiment that will make sure that you think versus just sitting around and memorizing and repeating. Now, most of you are loyal MK Ultra listeners. You're thinking constantly because what you figured out is that everyone lies to us constantly. And the only way that you figure out someone is lying is to think. I mean, that is the only way you can figure it out. If you go back for memorizing and repeating techniques, well, you'll just somehow patch it up. And because if you're very susceptible to memorizing and repeating as the only method of gaining any sort of use of your mind, you'll feel like you're thinking, but you're not. And because we revere people who can recall things as being intelligent, you get this false accolade that makes you feel like, well, I'm super smart. I know all this stuff, I quote tons of stuff out of thin air during this show, but at no point do I think I'm smart because I have damn near photographic memory. I get things wrong all the time too, but that doesn't make me, I don't give myself any accolades in life because I've got this memory that I've got and the way that it works. It's very pictorial inside my mind. Everything is a timeline. Everything is a stretch of pictures in my head. And so it's just the way I was, artistically developed, But that's not intelligence. I wouldn't let anyone say how smart I am because I memorize all this stuff. I'm smart on a whole different level because I'm willing to deduce things. I'm willing to sit in a chair right there for 2 hours and think something through that no one is thinking through, right? So part of what we do, and part of what Kyle does too, is we sit around and we hear what people tell us about reality, and then we go, okay, let's look at cause and effect models at all times, right? These official stories of false flags, all these attacks they do on, schools and marathons and movie theaters. We take apart, we're one of like millions of people that actually do this nowadays. But we take it apart fact by fact, and we find out that, if nothing else, a lot of the official stories can't be true. They just can't be true because they don't make scientific sense. They can't possibly have occurred. Now, that doesn't mean we know exactly who did it and why they did it, but sometimes it's fairly easy to infer that they're trying to go after the gun rights in America. Right now, Hillary Clinton and Obama are going after guns on a level that's ridiculous. They work for European banking cartels that want this country disarmed so that we can't fight back when they come in with their massive tyranny. That's what it's really about. Those two people should be absolutely pushed out of this country because they need to go live with the bankers that they serve. Just let them be with their masters. Because this plot of land is going to remain free with over 300 million guns to make sure that's the case, So when you're going through your regiment on a daily basis, right, we have to make sure that you're realizing, usually thinking is a very euphoric thing. Memorizing and repeating isn't euphoric. Memorizing and repeating, even though it hurts to do it sometimes, if you have a lot of information you need to memorize for college or something, or for work, it's not very fun because there's really nothing that you honestly will give yourself credit for. You know, when I was in Kansas as a kid, I took this Kansas, what's it called? It was like a Kansas civics class or something like that. It was like essentially the study of Kansas. And at one point there was a test, and there's 105 counties in Kansas. And they would give us a piece of paper of a big, it was an 8 by 11 piece of paper of the whole state of Kansas with all little boxes of every single county. And you had to memorize all 105 counties, exactly where they were, and know how to spell them properly, right? And I hadn't studied up until like the day before. And I didn't know any of the counties. I knew the one I lived in and the one above me, and I knew where Wichita was in Sedgwick County, and that was about it. I sat on the toilet in my house, I remember this, and I just started at the upper left-hand corner, and I put down the first one, and then I first, second, first, third, first, fifth, just kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Went in the next day, and I only missed 2 because I forgot how to spell 2 of them. Got 2 little letters messed up in 2 little counties, but I knew where all the counties were. That didn't make me feel smart. That made me feel like, wow, I got a memory that can click on when I need it. That was the only thing that happened there, but I didn't feel like I was smart at all, right? I just had this method. Okay. When you get into thinking, it should feel a bit like a frontier. And for those of you who didn't cross country in the 1800s, a frontier should feel like you are in a location, let's say it's 1840, and you're in America, you're in New York City, and you want to go west because you heard about this gold thing going on in San Francisco, and you got 3,500 miles to cross. There ain't no trains of any caliber, and there certainly aren't any planes. You got to walk. You got to go in your cabin. You got to go in a huge column of cabins to make sure you guys all protect yourself. A lot of Native Americans still think they own the land. Go figure. So you're going to cross the land, and every vista that you cross for you, because you've never been there before, conquistadors are running all over the place looking for the city made of gold, but you're crossing every vista, and it's all brand new. And you discover the Rocky Mountains. You discover lakes and ponds and roads and valleys and the Donner Party, right? That's sort of what it should feel like to think. It's you going to the precipice of a particular subject matter, and there's no information there. Now, at that point, you're probably going to do some research. Okay, you're going to take some keywords and look them up online. You're going to try to find, official stories from Wikipedia that's crap, and then you're going to try to go off and find some really cutting-edge scientists that are being repressed in the world and try to piece it all together to make sure that the theory you come up with is sort of equally represented on all sides. Try to look up different cultures that have a different story, One of the interesting ones you can do just as an esoteric exercise would be to look up the concept of a soul in multiple religions and multiple cultures around the world. And you'll realize that it's something that a lot of cultures have come to the conclusion that they believe that we have, especially before we institutionalized ourselves out of being more spiritual. But their definition and their meaning and their use and purpose and life cycle and ecosystem of a soul, both while it's in the mortal coil and how it communicates with other mortal coils, and then how it ascends after death and perhaps gets reincarnated in the body. It's a tremendous avenue to go down because people have thought about it a lot because everybody feels it, but they just don't have a mechanism of actually locking into it. You can't prove it, right? Now, there's religions that man writes down religious stories which are fake to try and help people do better in life. Those are different than just, it's a faith-based thing, and it really only matters if you can make your life better by believing it. But when it comes to a soul, you feel the inside perfection of your mind, right? You feel perfection inside yourself, and then you feel the frustration of trying to take that out into the real world. And for those of you who have, probably the easiest thing I can say is, for any of you draw or paint, you will invariably have these moments where you see something in your mind and you're like, man, I'm just going to get that on paper. I'm going to paint that on a canvas. And you start moving the lines from your mind onto paper or onto canvas, and it just doesn't quite look exactly the way that you envisioned it because your hand and your brain have never constructed certain lines before. And it takes just a little bit of attempting things before it actually comes out of your system. And consequently, just a little trick for you. A lot of the art colleges, and especially the Academy of Art in San Francisco, has got a very good technique to get what's in your brain out to paper and then refine up to a final product where you can show someone. And they have a very interesting technique, and I'm not even sure that they understand exactly the significance of what they're doing in the way I'm going to describe it to you. But they have thumbnails. They're really, really big on teaching you how to draw in thumbnails. They also do silhouettes. So imagine you need to draw, like when we did our last video game at my company, we were designing our own game, and it was a zombie fighting game. Really, really cute, sort of Disney-ish characters and that sort of stuff. So we had to design all these zombies, like 9 different zombies and their fight moves and stuff. And so, we could go anywhere we wanted to with these zombies, but I had an artist who was absolutely brilliant, graduate of the Academy of Art up in San Francisco, and she would create these little black and white silhouettes of what the shape of the body might look like. And they're just literally black silhouettes of a zombie standing side view. And so we'd look at these little thumbnails of these silhouettes, and we're like, that's a neat shape. Why don't you blow that one out and see where it goes? And then she'd take it and make it a slightly bigger thumbnail and fill it in, giving it some dimension in the head and the face and some actual illustration inside the body. And then we'd pick from that, and then we'd blow it up a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And we went from these tiny little things, which are effortless to create. And the other thing, too, is that when your hand only has to draw something about that big, well, you're going to be done very quickly because it would be like a Rubik's Cube with a couple colors on it, right? There's not much you can do to make it look different. So that's a technique to ebb your mind into thinking. One of the reasons why I like the deep thoughts thing is because I'm trying to get you guys to go on this journey with me for any one subject matter that we're going to be talking about, right? So as you hear my thought process with anything, and it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong, especially if I'm wrong, and you happen to know I'm wrong because you have more knowledge than I do about a subject, it's a beautiful thing because then you start thinking the contrary thoughts to what I've said. So it stimulates your mind to think, which is why I'm always trying to get you guys to go back and look at the other deep thoughts. It's not an ego thing to pump me up. This isn't about me at all. This is about you. This is about us more than anything, right? Where we need to share our knowledge back and forth and develop ourselves even further, right? So thinking is sort of a frontier of, wow, I've never thought about this before. That's the first step of the game. Then when you get into a category of thinking, right, you progress a thought forward. And I want you to think about a theory inside your mind. This is a good way to think, right? Get yourself, try to think up a theory about the brontosaurus. And it's a Monty Python joke if you don't catch that. Think of it as a tree, right? And the tree has branches on it. When you write a screenplay, for instance, which I highly recommend, I got an episode on screenwriting way back at the beginning. I think it's episode 4, Please, dear God, go off and listen to it because, again, you guys have stories in you and you just have no idea that you might be one of the greatest screenwriters on planet Earth. But if you never try, you're never going to know. So get into it. Everything's in that episode. I might do a second, after I get done with the script I'm working on, I might do a second episode on rewriting because I'll tell you what, the part of education that doesn't exist out there is about rewriting. And I've tried to get my teacher, Robert McKee, to do a book on rewriting. Because seriously, it is the most coveted method of getting your script sold is to do rewriting, right? But this tree analogy relates directly to screenwriting, but also relates to any theory that you have, which is you need to go down every branch of possibility in your story, in your theory. So you go down one branch and you're like, that didn't work out because these facts don't correlate. Then you go back to where it's last made sense and you go off in a completely different direction. Or a slightly different direction, right? You branch. You can even go down and backtrack on a single branch and go, this is where it started falling apart, so I'm going to go this way. Now, obviously, because of people like Stephen W. Hawking and the Big Bang, we know people can come up with pretty elaborate theories which make sense on paper, which make no sense in reality. Still, it's a valuable exercise. What we don't want to do is walk around with a theory that works on paper and preach it as the ultimate reality that we live in. Because that can screw up people. Because once people who don't think hear your theory, they're going to add an extra bar on the cage meaning their brain doesn't go that way because you've done all the hard work for them and you've done all the thinking for them. At no point do we want our children to stop thinking because mommy and daddy have all the rules, right? Now, we don't want them to get out of that pocket too soon, but at some point, you might want to encourage them to go down safe paths of thinking. If you can get your kid to write a story, it's amazing how quickly kids can write full-blown stories. As soon as you raise them on a computer so they can type, and you get them a good regimen of reading, you go to the bookstore and get them little tiny books, read to them, their vocabulary increases, their ability to communicate increases, and that all facilitates their ability to take in information. When I was a little kid, I remember I went to the library and I kept looking at all these little kid books and I just couldn't stand them. It was like I was the worst little kid in terms of buying into the indoctrination of what kids should sing and do. I think I said once before, when I had to sing, London Bridge is falling down or, row your boat or any of that kind of crap, I wanted to commit suicide. It was like the most childish thing. I'm a child and I'm thinking, this is so stupid. Like, I just can't do this. I can't. It's like, are you guys stupid? Like, can't we think about something more interesting? It was really, really weird. That's why I feel like I have an old soul, because I was born 30 years old or something. There's an old Sparks song called Beat the Clock, and it's sort of prancy, but the lyrics are awesome. It's like my whole life. I went to the library and I found a book, and I almost hate admitting this, but I didn't know what the Fourth Reich was, or Third Reich was. I didn't know what Hitler was or anything, but I saw this black book with a little swastika on the back, and I thought, oh, that looks neat, and not having any idea what it is, right? Please don't say I'm a born Aryan supremacist. But I got the book, and I started reading it, and I think I was about fourth grade, and this book was probably at least a sixth grade book in June. I'm not even sure why it was there, but the whole book was about a family that was hiding in the basement, doing propaganda for the, not propaganda. They were trying to fight the Nazis in the basement by duplicating pamphlets and newspapers and stuff. And I've never seen the book since. So if you guys have ever read this book, please tell me. So I'd love to read it nowadays that I'm out of this. But I kept taking the book up to the teacher because it had big words in it. And we're talking, I don't even know what the words were, but, probably words like immediately or something like that. And I kept taking it to the teacher and I said, well, what's this word? What's this word? What's this word? Well, she got tired of me going to her and asking her words. And I don't necessarily blame her. But she takes the book away and she goes, you know what? This book's really just too advanced for you. And I was reading about 98% of it fluently, right? I can still remember the story to this day. And I think I read it for only one day, She gave me this Fat People from Space book. And I'm looking at this book, and it's like thin, it's big, huge writing, only a few paragraphs, maybe even there's like a single paragraph on every one of the pages, and I'm like, this is horrible. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. So I got out of reading that junk, and then when I got my World Encyclopedias at 9, which was like the internet for 70s kids, man, I was on fire. It was more material than I was ever going to read before I graduated school, and so that's how my brain started to explode, is that every page I opened was a new frontier, thinking. My mind got off on the frontier of information that I had never processed before. And no matter how old you are and what you think you know, there's always frontiers out there that are interesting. But here's what I want to encourage you to do, okay? And I know, I can tell you right now, I know some of our listeners out there, I won't even name you guys because I'd have to name all of you to feel like I've done a decent job, but you know who you are. You're our main folks. You drive our episodes. We mention you on the episodes all the time. You guys think. You guys look at information and you don't believe everything that you're told. Now, you may analyze what you've been told and go from I don't believe this to I believe this, but you have done the thinking due diligence to get there. God bless every single one of you. You're your own mini MK Ultra, show. And again, I want to say, it goes something like this. That shows, and I'll just stick with shows. They tell their fans or their listeners or whatever, their loyalists, that it's like, we're nothing without you, and sort of the boilerplate statements. You have to understand, when Kyle and I sit down and we try to decide how to pitch a show or angle a show, when I'm doing these deep thoughts, it is so hugely based on your exploration and your posts. And even if we don't have the time in the day to take your post and move it from the you contributed this to the page over to the main thread, and it's just a matter of time, you have to understand there's a lot of stuff going in those channels, and we want to vet every single one of them. But I view certain folks out there for sure. I see them post something, and I immediately go and watch the video all the way through. I sit in my backyard, I watch the whole thing through, and I sort of bake in, okay, this listener had this interest, and if any one of you like each other's stuff, it votes it up in my mind that you guys have interest in those subjects. So you have to understand that you guys, whether or not you like it or not, if you participate in our Facebook page, at least that's where we really have the communication. And we're sorry it's Facebook. We know it's a NSA gathering mechanism, face scraper, selfie annihilator thing. That's how we come up with the genetics of the show. Because we have our own ideas, of course, about how things should go and that sort of thing. But I would say minimum 40% of the content that we talk about on the show is based on your interests, right? And there's some deep thoughts I'm actually boiling up that I need to do more research on that are based on some of the ongoing things that are out there that you guys are curious about. But I have to come up with at least an hour's worth of riffing on it to make an episode on it. So in terms of thinking, the eco cycle in our folks is fantastic. If you're brand new to the show, go to mkultraradio.com. I'm not signing off right now, but go to mkultraradio.com, click on Facebook, and get over and just view what people are posting. You might find it horrifying if you're brand new to our franchise, because we're definitely going down paths that the normal society doesn't. And we're not just trying to be ornery bastards with our information. We're not just trying to be naysayers of reality. We're really trying to vet everything that's out there. But that is only going to happen, and it only happens, and it only has ever happened because you guys are thinking. Yes, you memorize and repeat things to keep the usually the claims of fraud up for vetting. It's almost like you develop film back in the day, the old kind, and you create contact sheets or exposure sheets, and you just keep putting them on a clothesline as they dry, and then you look at the evidence. It's like an old PI. You say, well, they said that this guy got his leg blown off in Boston, but this doesn't work out, that doesn't work out, and his buddies from the military turned him in that 2 years ago he'd already lost both of his legs. Here's a photograph of him with nubs for thighs, right? And all of a sudden he shows up in Boston bombing with a fake leg, and he has more blood on him as every picture is taken, right? And it just looks silly, and every military doctor says the guy would have bled out and at least passed out because of the loss of blood pressure. No tourniquet on an open leg, he's going to die. It just happens. And one guy says, I patched him up in Afghanistan or wherever the hell he was 2 years earlier. Thinking. It's the only way we're going to protect ourselves. Now, there's a Twilight Zone out there called The Obsolete Man. It's got Burgess Meredith in it, and I would say that if you're new to the old Rod Serling Twilight Zones, go onto Netflix if you've got an account. Specifically, use the internet to guide yourself through the episodes, but you watch every single Burgess Meredith episode that Twilight Zone was ever made that used his skills, and you will have ingested the cream of the crop. Now, there's all kinds of other fantastic episodes out there, of course, and obviously just watching them all. But one thing that the Twilight Zone did, and one thing that Rod Serling was huge on, was thinking. The basis of his episodes were always based on you're completely indoctrinated to think about everything this way, and the Twilight Zone is this mezzanine between consciousness and unconsciousness. This is what it really is. And this is where we take you to have these twists of reality so that you think everything a little bit differently. They did the Faustus, algorithm where a gangster actually dies, gets shot up by the cops, and thinks he goes to heaven. And he ends up going into a palatial penthouse suite with his little butler guy. And the butler guy gives him everything he wants, women, money, everything. And he starts gambling all the time. And then he realizes when he starts gambling that he never loses. He never, ever loses. And he's like, what's the deal, man? This doesn't feel real. This feels like you're just making me win all the time. And he's like, I don't want to win all the time. I want to lose every once in a while. And so the old man starts, okay, all right, we'll make it all, variable. He's like, no, I just want it to be real. And he's like, So eventually he finds out that he thought he went to heaven because all the greed algorithms in his mind were being satiated in this new place that he went. It was palatial and beautiful babes. He could have as much sex as he wanted and drink as much as he wanted and no ill effects. But when he said, I didn't think heaven would be like this, and the old man looks at him and smiles and gives him this horrible devilish laugh, and he says, what makes you think you went to heaven? And he realizes he went to hell. That is a great series to make you think. And that's what all movies should do. That's what all storytelling should do. And that's hopefully what a lot of the conversation that you have does, unless you're just trying to catch up with an old friend to figure out what, your friends have been doing or what mom and dad has been doing, right? But the other huge one I have to say before we close this off is I need you to go out and think about things you wouldn't have ever imagined that you would think about. And what are some examples? I'm going to give you some crazy examples that you're like, no way would I ever spend my life thinking about this. But if you can't get into the ones I'm telling you about, it's not important to me that you go off and do the ones I'm going to tell you about. But I want to encourage you to find your own questions out there. And I mean, if you walk the beach and you look at sea life, or you look at rocks, you look at beach glass, you look at the way the waves come in, the way the sun sets, use all those mechanisms to find something to think about. And we're sort of in the golden age of theories that are unproven, right? There's a big contingency of our listeners that are studying flat Earth because one guy heard another guy making videos, and he's been posting that on our site, and now we're all curious to go, all right, at face value, it seems utterly absurd that anyone would ever think that the world is a flat surface. But then our listeners trying to make us think, well, why do you think it's spherical? Have you ever seen the world from space to make sure it's spherical? Right? Have you ever seen the moon from any other angle but the one side that it always shows to us? Again, I'm not trying to tell you that it's flat. I'm just telling you that someone is willing to do the thinking. And they're not worried if you give a crap about it. They're not worried if you approve of them. And that's what you need to do. Do you think Copernicus and Galileo worried about what people thought of what they were coming up with? Hell no. They were off on their own thinking. So here's a couple that I think are really interesting. I'm just going to give you some of the examples that I did as a kid. I've told this story several times, but when I was a kid, 9 years old, I saw a movie called China Syndrome, and it made us all fear nuclear power plants, and probably for good reason, but not, what happened to Fukushima was a China Syndrome, and it happened in Japan, close to China. It's kind of funny. But funny isn't interesting and alarming. But the whole idea was that, when a nuclear power plant goes critical, that the containers that hold all of the rods will heat up and melt through the container, and it starts just boiling down to the mantle of Earth. Now, the real truth of this is that you couldn't probably find a safer place for all the radioactive material to go than into the bowels of the Earth and get harnessed by the mantle. But it needs to go down a mile or two, before it starts being out of the water mantles and stops being a danger to man. But I went into the encyclopedia after I saw this because I was starting to lose sleep over it, right? I was kind of like a little kid, almost like back in the 50s, where they were trying to terrify all the children that they were going to die of a nuclear bomb, right? So I've got friends of mine who are in their 70s, and they were like, look, when I was a little kid, he goes, you don't understand. He said, we all feared dying in a nuclear holocaust. And one of my friends lived in Utah when he was a kid, and he would literally watch the countdowns on television, run to look out the window, and he'd see the atom bomb flash on the other side of the mountains, which was several miles away. But he'd run his bedroom and climb in bed and cry because he thought it was going to kill him. He thought the cloud was going to come get him, right? Because he was a child. So I got in the world encyclopedias, and I started studying atomic everything, right? How reactors work, how fission works, how to create a fission reaction, how to slow it down, and I ended up designing a new nuclear power plant that would never have a Fukushima problem. And I was a little kid. Now, it's because no one said I couldn't do it that I did it. And there's no one telling you, especially as an adult, that you can't think. So you can come up with all kinds of wild solutions. Stan Myers, who invented that engine that runs on tap water before they murdered him in 1998, no one told him he couldn't do it. And that's one of the beautiful things about sovereignty. Hell, you could probably be in a communistic country like China and still in your backyard think up things. There's all kinds of farmers in China. They come up with these wild inventions. There's a Chinese farmer that had both of his arms ripped off due to some farming accident. And so what did he do? With no money, okay, he got scrap metal from all around his community, and he pounded together prosthetic arms with functioning hands. some that are just like this and some that actually can actuate if he moves his elbow in a certain way, right? Well, now he sits in China, not making any money, but he's building prosthetics for all kinds of folks that have had injuries over there, especially people that have lost hands and arms. People need new legs. He's developed a skill out of nothing. How awesome is that? He thought, instead of just taking this memorizing repeat regimen, to say, you can't do it. Like I said, I've complimented some of our listeners for doing cool things in their backyard, one of our listeners has gotten into sketching, painting, and writing. Well, that's him thinking, let me tell you, what are you going to paint? How are you going to paint it? What's your technique? What's your style? What story are you going to write? This dude is in complete thinking mode 24/7. And that's just the stuff we know about, let alone all the other research he does, right? And it doesn't matter to me whether his research is on the button of something correct or something incorrect. If he were to certify to himself something is correct, then he has that knowledge. If he certifies something's incorrect to him, he's got that knowledge too. It's like you got a blindfold on and you're going through a maze. Well, you figure out where the walls are, you figure out where the paths are. That's how thinking works inside the mind, right? So now let's advance up. One of our other listeners, which I said he builds medieval equipment on his head. And he probably can get into everything, but he's just chosen to really start with helmets. Out of thin air. It's a hobby. Maybe it could turn into a career. Who knows? Guarantee you people will pay some serious bucks for that if they're going off to a Renaissance fair and they want something authentic for their head, right? It's all thinking. That's why art is so huge. You can't really get into creating art of any kind without guaranteeing that your mind is going to think, which is why art not only expands the consciousness of you, but if anyone gets into your art, it expands their consciousness as well, because you're showing them the limitations that do not exist in the universe. All right, if someone shows you a painting and you're like, let's say that you're jealous, just for a split second, that someone did a painting. I feel it all the time when I see people do great stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to really get to a point where I can gear my life to get back into painting 24/7. I feel it, but you know what I do is I go, well, what am I working on right now that will get me to that other goal? Okay, I say I'm writing a film. I just take that frustration of not being able to do the B thing, and I go and finish my A thing, and I try to bring as much art and depth and layering into what I do to make it interesting for everybody else, right? The reason why I go through these examples is to just drive home, hopefully, the obvious, but maybe even the not obvious thoughts, which are how to form a life that is stuck in the regimen of thinking versus memorizing and repeating. Now, again, there's no problem with studying things to memorize and repeat them. No problem with that at all. I'm not trying to demonize that kind of stuff. My caution to you is, to the degree you watch shows like Jeopardy on television, and you think that those people have the drop on you for intelligence, think again, right? But I promised you I'd come up with some ideas for you. Okay. I think one of the most fundamental questions you can ask, which is where most of the philosophers several thousand years ago, your Aristotles, your Socrates, and those guys, they really contemplated what is reality and what is life. Do we have souls? Are we just flesh and bone? Is this just dirt talking to dirt and having emotions? I saw an interesting documentary the other day, or actually it was an interview, and I think it was one of the flat earth expert guys. And he said, what scientists want us to believe is that dirt came first and then conscious thought came out of dirt. And he goes, if you just look at it at face value, thought came first and then dirt came out of thought. That creationism is a conscious thought. That all the math and science that's in the universe that we are archaeologically digging out in discovery to be, we found calculus. Calculus existed before Newton found it. He just happened to be the human being that thought about it and said, I'm in a new frontier. I need to calculate the area of a curve, and I'm going to go for it. And he did. Da Vinci. Look at all the stuff Da Vinci created out of thin air. Flight for man. Never quite totally got it, but man, the guy advanced the theories up to the point when the Wright brothers jumped into the equation. If they had a reference of what Da Vinci had drawn on paper, they're like, okay, well, that didn't work, and maybe this would work, and they go to the next level, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So one of the areas I would definitely suggest is trying to answer the question for yourself, what you think reality is. What are we? If it's a flat earth, then the whole planet's like Dark City. If you haven't seen that movie, go see it. Probably could rent it on Netflix. The Dark City was a flat Earth slice of the planet. It was only one city, and at night, these aliens that created the world tune us every single evening when we all go to bed. And again, there's this huge question I have, which is, why do we sleep? They tell us, well, your body needs to rest, and scientists, psychologists say, I just made this up out of thin air. Well, you're filing away all the memories that you had all day. Stupidest idea. Oh, you mean if I don't sleep, I don't remember what happened the day before? Right. Nobody knows, but we have to sleep. Your body is 100% active when you're asleep, so it's not like you're really resting. My heart keeps beating all night long. All the capillaries in my body and everything in my system is going. I dream like crazy, so you can't tell me my mind shuts off when I go to sleep. But somehow I get tired and I have to go to sleep. And obviously, one half of the world sleeps, one half of the world is awake, and people on coke are constantly running around. But the idea is there's some reason why we have to sleep. And why is that? Those are some of the basic questions in life you can ask. What is gravity? That's another huge one. Again, I think through Eric Dollard, we've got gravity pegged, regardless if it's flat or not. But we need to become thinkers again. Once the regimen of thinking is a fad again, because it's sure as hell is not a fad right now, as they run all their false flags on us and all this crazy crap, we'll think it through instead of just swallowing it. And that's huge for us, right? So I think you get me. I'm not going to go any more loops. I appreciate you guys listening. If you made it this far, I've been wanting to redo this one for a while. I wanted it to be more nebulous because I think it feels a little bit better when it's not studious. I think when it's a stream of conscious thought, it's almost as if I'm singing you a song and I'm taking you through the verse structure and the tension and the release of thought. Please comment if you like this stuff. And again, if you dig the channel, go ahead and subscribe. If you like it, like it. I would always encourage you to go back and listen to all the other deep thoughts if this is your bag. We'll have another show out tomorrow, this is Saturday, so tomorrow will be Sunday. I'll probably get this out around the same time. It takes me about an evening to edit these things together. So, again, thank you for listening. We really don't exist without you. Please throw me some ideas, because I almost feel like I'm being selfish with the topics of deep thought. I want them to be a bit of a surprise to you, and I want them to have some revelations you've never thought of. But it could be that one that I'm telling you guys to think, right? And so you guys are thinking about things, and you're like, I've taken it this far, and I need another opinion. And maybe I've got some opinions that are cool that get you to the next level. Maybe I'm completely wrong about everything I would think about it, but that spurns you into thinking the one that's correct, at least for you, right? So I want to hear from you, and please get up on mkultraradio.com. Again, the Facebook link is at the top. You can always comment on these videos if you're getting it through YouTube. If you're strictly an audio listener, Facebook is your way to get us. And if you just want to know, it's facebook.com/mkultraradio. Very simple. Anyhow, I want you to learn the rules that rule you. Share them with me. Take care of yourself and somebody else. And I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.